Aesop Fables for Children. Story of Hercules and the Wagoner. A farmer was driving his wagon along a miry country road after a heavy rain. The horses could hardly drag the load through the deep mud, and at last came to a standstill when one of the wheels sank to the hub in a rut. The farmer climbed down from his seat and stood beside the wagon looking at it, but without making the least effort to get it out of the rut. All he did was to curse his bad luck and call loudly on Hercules to come to his aid. Then, it is said, Hercules really did appear, saying, "Put your shoulder to the wheel, man, and urge on your horses. Do you think you can move the wagon by simply looking at it and whining about it? Hercules will not help unless you make some effort to help yourself." And when the farmer put his shoulder to the wheel and urged on the horses, the wagon moved very readily, and soon the farmer was riding along in great content and with a good lesson learned. The moral of the story is this: self-help is the best help. Heaven helps those who help themselves. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of Jupiter and the Monkey. There was once a baby show among the animals in the forest. Jupiter provided the prize. Of course, all the proud mamas from far and near brought their babies, but none got there earlier than Mother Monkey. Proudly she presented her baby among the other contestants. As you can imagine, there was quite a laugh when the animals saw the ugly, flat-nosed, hairless, pop-eyed little creature. "Laugh, if you will," said the Mother Monkey. "Though Jupiter may not give him the prize, I know that he is the prettiest, the sweetest, the dearest darling in the world." The moral of the story is this: mother love is blind. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of Mercury and the Woodman. A poor woodman was cutting down a tree near the edge of a deep pool in the forest. It was late in the day, and the woodman was tired. He had been working since sunrise, and his strokes were not so sure as they had been early that morning. Thus it happened that the axe slipped and flew out of his hands into the pool. The woodman was in despair. The axe was all he possessed with which to make a living, and he had not money enough to buy a new one. As he stood wringing his hands and weeping, the god Mercury suddenly appeared and asked what the trouble was. The woodman told what had happened, and straightway the kind Mercury dived into the pool. When he came up again, he held a wonderful golden axe. "Is this your axe?" Mercury asked the woodman. "No," answered the honest woodman, "that is not my axe." Mercury laid the golden axe on the bank and sprang back into the pool. This time he brought up an axe of silver, but the woodman declared again that his axe was just an ordinary one, with a wooden handle. Mercury dived down for the third time, and when he came up again, he had the very axe that had been lost. The poor woodman was very glad that his axe had been found, and could not thank the kind god enough. Mercury was greatly pleased with the woodman's honesty. "I admire your honesty," he said, "and as a reward you may have all 3 axes, the gold and the silver as well as your own." The happy woodman returned to his home with his treasures, and soon the story of his good fortune was known to everybody in the village. Now there were several woodmen in the village who believed that they could easily win the same good fortune. They hurried out into the woods, one here, one there, and hiding their axes in the bushes, pretended they had lost them. Then they wept and wailed and called on Mercury to help them. And indeed, Mercury did appear, first to this one, then to that. To each one he showed an axe of gold, and each one eagerly claimed it to be the one he had lost. But Mercury did not give them the golden axe. Oh no! Instead, he gave them each a hard whack over the head with it and sent them home. And when they returned next day to look for their own axes, they were nowhere to be found. The moral of the story is this: honesty is the best policy. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Animals and the Plague. Once upon a time, a severe plague raged among the animals. Many died, and those who lived were so ill that they cared for neither food nor drink and dragged themselves about listlessly. No longer could a fat young hen tempt Master Fox to dinner, nor a tender lamb rouse greedy Sir Wolf's appetite. At last the lion decided to call a council. When all the animals were gathered together, he arose and said, "Dear friends, I believe the gods have sent this plague upon us as a punishment for our sins. Therefore, the most guilty one of us must be offered in sacrifice. Perhaps we may thus obtain forgiveness and cure for all. I will confess all my sins first. I admit that I have been very greedy and have devoured many sheep. They had done me no harm. I have eaten goats and bulls and stags. To tell the truth, I even ate up a shepherd now and then. Now, if I am the most guilty, I am ready to be sacrificed, but I think it best that each one confess his sins as I have done. Then, we can decide in all justice who is the most guilty." "Your Majesty," said the fox, "you are too good. Can it be a crime to eat sheep, such stupid mutton-heads? No, Your Majesty, you have done them great honor by eating them up, and so far as shepherds are concerned, we all know they belong to that puny race that pretends to be our masters." All the animals applauded the fox loudly. Then, though the tiger, the bear, the wolf, and all the savage beasts recited the most wicked deeds, all were excused and made to appear very saint-like and innocent. It was now the ass's turn to confess. "I remember," he said guiltily, "that one day, as I was passing a field belonging to some priests, I was so tempted by the tender grass and my hunger that I could not resist nibbling a bit of it. I had no right to do it, I admit." A great uproar among the beasts interrupted him. Here was the culprit who had brought misfortune on all of them. What a horrible crime it was to eat grass that belonged to someone else. It was enough to hang anyone for, much more an ass. Immediately they all fell upon him, the wolf in the lead, and soon had made an end to him, sacrificing him to the gods then and there, and without the formality of an altar. The moral of the story is this: the weak are made to suffer for the misdeeds of the powerful. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Ant and the Dove. A dove saw an ant fall into a brook. The ant struggled in vain to reach the bank, and in pity, the dove dropped a blade of straw close beside it. Clinging to the straw like a shipwrecked sailor to a broken spar, the ant floated safely to shore. Soon after, the ant saw a man getting ready to kill the dove with a stone. But just as he cast the stone, the ant stung him in the heel, so that the pain made him miss his aim, and the startled dove flew to safety in a distant wood. The moral of the story is this: a kindness is never wasted. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Ants and the Grasshopper. One bright day in late autumn, a family of ants were bustling about in the warm sunshine, drying out the grain they had stored up during the summer, when a starving grasshopper, his fiddle under his arm, came up and humbly begged for a bite to eat. "What?" cried the ants in surprise. "Haven't you stored anything away for the winter? What in the world were you doing all last summer?" "I didn't have time to store up any food," whined the grasshopper. "I was so busy making music that before I knew it, the summer was gone." The ants shrugged their shoulders in disgust. "Making music, were you?" they cried. "Very well, now dance." And they turned their backs on the grasshopper and went on with their work. The moral of the story is this: there's a time for work and a time for play. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Astrologer. A man who lived a long time ago believed that he could read the future in the stars. He called himself an astrologer, and spent his time at night gazing at the sky. One evening he was walking along the open road outside the village. His eyes were fixed on the stars. He thought he saw there that the end of the world was at hand, when all at once, down he went into a hole full of mud and water. There he stood up to his ears, in the muddy water, and madly clawing at the slippery sides of the hole in his effort to climb out. His cries for help soon brought the villagers running. As they pulled him out of the mud, one of them said, "You pretend to read the future in the stars, and yet you fail to see what is at your feet. This may teach you to pay more attention to what is right in front of you, and let the future take care of itself." "What use is it," said another, "to read the stars, when you can't see what's right here on the earth?" The moral of the story is this: take care of the little things, and the big things will take care of themselves. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Bat and the Weasels. A bat blundered into the nest of a weasel, who ran up to catch and eat him. The bat begged for his life, but the weasel would not listen. "You are a mouse," he said, "and I am a sworn enemy of mice. Every mouse I catch, I am going to eat." "But I am not a mouse," cried the bat. "Look at my wings. Can mice fly?" "Why, I am only a bird. Please let me go." The weasel had to admit that the bat was not a mouse, so he let him go. But a few days later, the foolish bat went blindly into the nest of another weasel. This weasel happened to be a bitter enemy of birds, and he soon had the bat under his claws, ready to eat him. "You are a bird," he said, "and I am going to eat you." "What?" cried the bat. "I, a bird? Why, all birds have feathers. I am nothing but a mouse. Down with all cats is my motto." And so the bat escaped with his life a second time. The moral of the story is this: set your sails with the wind. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Bear and the Bees. A bear roaming the woods in search of berries happened on a fallen tree in which a swarm of bees had stored their honey. The bear began to nose around the log very carefully to find out if the bees were at home. Just then, one of the swarm came home from the clover field with a load of sweets. Guessing what the bear was after, the bee flew at him, stung him sharply, and then disappeared into the hollow log. The bear lost his temper in an instant and sprang upon the log tooth and claw to destroy the nest. But this only brought out the whole swarm. The poor bear had to take to his heels, and he was able to save himself only by diving into a pool of water. The moral of the story is this: it is wiser to bear a single injury in silence than to provoke 1,000 by flying into a rage. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Bees and Wasps and the Hornet. A store of honey had been found in a hollow tree, and the wasps declared positively that it belonged to them. The bees were just as sure that the treasure was theirs. The argument grew very pointed, and it looked as if the affair could not be settled without a battle, when at last, with much good sense, they agreed to let a judge decide the matter. So they brought the case before the Hornet, justice of the peace in that part of the woods. When the judge called the case, witnesses declared that they had seen certain winged creatures in the neighborhood of the hollow tree, who hummed loudly, and whose bodies were striped, yellow and black, like bees. Counsel for the Wasps immediately insisted that this description fitted his clients exactly. Such evidence did not help Judge Hornet to any decision, so he adjourned court for 6 weeks to give him time to think it over. When the case came up again, both sides had a large number of witnesses. An ant was first to take the stand, and was about to be cross-examined when a wise old bee addressed the court. "Your Honor," he said, "the case has now been pending for 6 weeks. If it is not decided soon, the honey will not be fit for anything. I move that the bees and the wasps be both instructed to build a honeycomb. Then we shall soon see to whom the honey really belongs." The wasps protested loudly. Wise Judge Hornet quickly understood why they did so. They knew they could not build a honeycomb and fill it with honey. "It is clear," said the judge, "who made the comb and who could not have made it. The honey belongs to the bees." The moral of the story is this: ability proves itself by deeds. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Birds, the Beasts, and the Bat. The birds and the beasts declared war against each other. No compromise was possible, and so they went at it tooth and claw. It is said the quarrel grew out of the persecution the race of geese suffered at the teeth of the fox family. The beasts, too, had cause for fight. The eagle was constantly pouncing on the hare, and the owl dined daily on mice. It was a terrible battle. Many a hare and many a mouse died. Chickens and geese fell by the score, and the victor always stopped for a feast. Now the bat family had not openly joined either side. They were a very politic race. So when they saw the birds getting the better of it, they were birds for all there was in it. But when the tide of battle turned, they immediately sided with the beasts. When the battle was over, the conduct of the bats was discussed at the peace conference. Such deceit was unpardonable, and birds and beasts made common cause to drive out the bats. And since then the bat family hides in dark towers and deserted ruins, flying out only in the night. The moral of the story is this: the deceitful have no friends. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Boy and the Filberts. A boy was given permission to put his hand into a pitcher to get some filberts. But he took such a great fistful that he could not draw his hand out again. There he stood, unwilling to give up a single filberts, and yet unable to get them all out at once. Vexed and disappointed, he began to cry. "My boy," said his mother, "be satisfied with half the nuts you have taken, and you will easily get your hand out. Then perhaps you may have some more filberts some other time." The moral of the story is this: do not attempt too much at once. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Boys and the Frogs. Some boys were playing one day at the edge of a pond in which lived a family of frogs. The boys amused themselves by throwing stones into the pond so as to make them skip on top of the water. The stones were flying thick and fast, and the boys were enjoying themselves very much, but the poor frogs in the pond were trembling with fear. At last one of the frogs, the oldest and bravest, put his head out of the water and said, "Oh, please, dear children, stop your cruel play. Though it may be fun for you, it means death to us." The moral of the story is this: always stop to think whether your fun may not be the cause of another's unhappiness. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Bull and the Goat. A bull once escaped from a lion by entering a cave which the goat herds used to house their flocks in stormy weather and at night. It happened that one of the goats had been left behind, and the bull had no sooner got inside than this goat lowered his head and made a rush at him, butting him with his horns. As the lion was still prowling outside the entrance to the cave, the bull had to submit to the insult. "Do not think," he said, "that I submit to your cowardly treatment because I am afraid of you. When that lion leaves, I'll teach you a lesson you won't forget." The moral of the story is this: it is wicked to take advantage of another's distress. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Bundle of Sticks. The Bundle of Sticks. A certain father had a family of sons, who were forever quarreling among themselves. No words he could say did the least good, so he cast about in his mind for some very striking example that should make them see that discord would lead them to misfortune. One day, when the quarreling had been much more violent than usual and each of the sons was moping in a surly manner, he asked one of them to bring him a bundle of sticks. Then, handing the bundle to each of his sons in turn, he told them to try to break it, but although each one tried his best, none was able to do so. The father then untied the bundle and gave the sticks to his sons to break one by one. This they did very easily. "My sons," said the father, "do you not see how certain it is that if you agree with each other and help each other, it will be impossible for your enemies to injure you? But if you are divided among yourselves, you will be no stronger than a single stick in that bundle." The moral of the story is this: in unity is strength. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Cat and the Birds. A cat was growing very thin. As you have guessed, he did not get enough to eat. One day, he heard that some birds in the neighborhood were ailing and needed a doctor. So he put on a pair of spectacles and, with a leather box in his hand, knocked at the door of the birds' home. The birds peeped out, and Dr. Cat, with much solicitude, asked how they were. He would be very happy to give them some medicine. "Tweet, tweet," laughed the birds. "Very smart, aren't you?" "We are very well, thank you, and more so, if you only keep away from here." The moral of the story is this: be wise and shun the quack. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Cat and the Fox. Once, a cat and a fox were traveling together. As they went along, picking up provisions on the way, a stray mouse here, a fat chicken there, they began an argument to while away the time between bites. And, as usually happens when comrades argue, the talk began to get personal. "You think you are extremely clever, don't you?" said the fox. "Do you pretend to know more than I?" "Why, I know a whole sack full of tricks." "Well," retorted the cat, "I admit I know one trick only, but that one, let me tell you, is worth 1,000 of yours." Just then, close by, they heard a hunter's horn and the yelping of a pack of hounds. In an instant the cat was up a tree, hiding among the leaves. "This is my trick," he called to the fox. "Now let me see what yours are worth." But the fox had so many plans for escape, he could not decide which one to try first. He dodged here and there, with the hounds at his heels. He doubled on his tracks, he ran at top speed, he entered a dozen burrows, but all in vain. The hounds caught him, and soon put an end to the boaster and all his tricks. The moral of the story is this: common sense is always worth more than cunning. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Cat and the Old Rat. There was once a cat who was so watchful that a mouse hardly dared show the tip of his whiskers for fear of being eaten alive. That cat seemed to be everywhere at once, with his claws all ready for a pounce. At last, the mice kept so closely to their dens that the cat saw he would have to use his wits well to catch one. So one day he climbed up on a shelf and hung from it, head downward, as if he were dead, holding himself up by clinging to some ropes with one paw. When the mice peeped out and saw him in that position, they thought he had been hung up there in punishment for some misdeed. Very timidly at first, they stuck out their heads and sniffed about carefully. But as nothing stirred, all trooped joyfully out to celebrate the death of the cat. Just then the cat let go his hold, and before the mice recovered from their surprise, he had made an end of 3 or 4. Now the mice kept more strictly at home than ever. But the cat, who was still hungry for mice, knew more tricks than one. Rolling himself in flour until he was covered completely, he lay down in the flour bin, with one eye open for the mice. Sure enough, the mice soon began to come out. To the cat, it was almost as if he already had a plump young mouse under his claws, when an old rat, who had had much experience with cats and traps, and had even lost a part of his tail to pay for it, sat up at a safe distance from a hole in the wall where he lived. "Take care," he cried. "That may be a heap of meal, but it looks to me very much like the cat. Whatever it is wisest to keep at a safe distance." The moral of the story is this: the wise do not let themselves be tricked a second time. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Cat, the Cock, and the Young Mouse. A very young mouse, who had never seen anything of the world, almost came to grief the very first time he ventured out. And this is the story he told his mother about his adventures. "I was strolling along very peaceably when, just as I turned the corner into the next yard, I saw two strange creatures. One of them had a very kind and gracious look, but the other was the most fearful monster you can imagine. You should have seen him. On top of his head and in front of his neck hung pieces of raw red meat. He walked about restlessly, tearing up the ground with his toes and beating his arms savagely against his sides. The moment he caught sight of me, he opened his pointed mouth as if to swallow me, and then he let out a piercing roar that frightened me almost to death." Can you guess who it was that our young mouse was trying to describe to his mother? It was nobody but the barnyard cock, and the first one the little mouse had ever seen. "If it had not been for that terrible monster," the mouse went on, "I should have made the acquaintance of the pretty creature, who looked so good and gentle. He had thick, velvety fur, a meek face, and a look that was very modest, though his eyes were bright and shining. As he looked at me, he waved his fine long tail and smiled. I am sure he was just about to speak to me when the monster I have told you about let out a screaming yell, and I ran for my life." "My son," said the mother mouse, "that gentle creature you saw was none other than the cat. Under his kindly appearance, he bears a grudge against every one of us. The other was nothing but a bird who wouldn't harm you in the least. As for the cat, he eats us. So be thankful, my child, that you escaped with your life. And as long as you live, never judge people by their looks." The moral of the story is this: do not trust alone to outward appearances. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Cock and the Fox. A fox was caught in a trap one fine morning because he had got too near the farmer's hen house. No doubt he was hungry, but that was not an excuse for stealing. A cock, rising early, discovered what had happened. He knew the fox could not get at him, so he went a little closer to get a good look at his enemy. The fox saw a slender chance of escape. "Dear friend," he said, "I was just on my way to visit a sick relative when I stumbled into this string and got all tangled up. But please do not tell anybody about it. I dislike causing sorrow to anybody, and I am sure I can soon gnaw this string to pieces." But the cock was not to be so easily fooled. He soon roused the whole hen yard, and when the farmer came running out, that was the end of Mr. Fox. The moral of the story is this: the wicked deserve no aid. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Cock and the Fox. One bright evening, as the sun was sinking on a glorious world, a wise old cock flew into a tree to roost. Before he composed himself to rest, he flapped his wings 3 times and crowed loudly. But just as he was about to put his head under his wing, his beady eyes caught a flash of red and a glimpse of a long, pointed nose. And there, just below him, stood Master Fox. "Have you heard the wonderful news?" cried the fox, in a very joyful and excited manner. "What news?" asked the cock very calmly. But he had a queer, fluttery feeling inside him, for, he was very much afraid of the fox. "Your family, and mine and all other animals, have agreed to forget their differences and live in peace and friendship from now on forever. Just think of it. I simply cannot wait to embrace you. Do come down, dear friend, and let us celebrate the joyful event." "How grand," said the cock. I certainly am delighted at the news." But he spoke in an absent way, and stretching up on tiptoes, seemed to be looking at something afar off. "What is it you see?" asked the fox a little anxiously. "Why, it looks to me like a couple of dogs coming this way. They must have heard the good news and—" But the fox did not wait to hear more. Off he started on a run. "Wait!" cried the cock. "Why do you run? The dogs are friends of yours now." "Yes," answered the fox, "but they might not have heard the news. Besides, I have a very important errand that I had almost forgotten about." The cock smiled as he buried his head in his feathers and went to sleep, for he had succeeded in outwitting a very crafty enemy. The moral of the story is this: the trickster is easily tricked. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Donkey and His Driver. A donkey was being driven along a road leading down the mountainside, when he suddenly took it into his silly head to choose his own path. He could see his stall at the foot of the mountain, and to him the quickest way down seemed to be over the edge of the nearest cliff. Just as he was about to leap over, his master caught him by the tail and tried to pull him back, but the stubborn donkey would not yield and pulled with all his might. "Very well," said his master. "Go your way, you willful beast, and see where it leads you." With that he let go, and the foolish donkey tumbled head over heels down the mountainside. The moral of the story is this: they who will not listen to reason but stubbornly go their own way against the friendly advice of those who are wiser than they are on the road to misfortune. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Donkey and His Shadow. A traveler had hired a donkey to carry him to a distant part of the country. The owner of the donkey went with the traveler, walking beside him to drive the donkey and point out the way. The road led across a treeless plain where the sun beat down fiercely. So intense did the heat become that the traveler at last decided to stop for a rest. And as there was no other shade to be found, the traveler sat down in the shadow of the donkey. Now the heat had affected the driver as much as it had the traveler, and even more, for he had been walking. Wishing also to rest in the shade cast by the donkey, he began to quarrel with the traveler, saying he had hired the donkey and not the shadow it cast. The two soon came to blows, and while they were fighting, the donkey took to its heels. The moral of the story is this: in quarreling about the shadow, we often lose the substance. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Donkey and the Grasshoppers. One day, as a donkey was walking in the pasture, he found some grasshoppers chirping merrily in a grassy corner of the field. He listened with a great deal of admiration to the song of the grasshoppers. It was such a joyful song that his pleasure-loving heart was filled with a wish to sing as they did. "What is it," he asked very respectfully, "that has given you such beautiful voices? Is there any special food you eat, or is it some divine nectar that makes you sing so wonderfully?" "Yes," said the grasshoppers, who were very fond of a joke. "It is the dew we drink. Try some and see." So thereafter the donkey would eat nothing and drink nothing but dew. Naturally, the poor foolish donkey soon died. The moral of the story is this: the laws of nature are unchangeable. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Donkey and the Lapdog. There was once a donkey whose master also owned a lapdog. This dog was a favorite and received many a pat and kind word from his master, as well as choice bits from his plate. Every day the dog would run to meet the master, frisking playfully about and leaping up to lick his hands and face. All this the donkey saw with much discontent. Though he was well fed, he had much work to do. Besides, the master hardly ever took any notice of him. Now the jealous donkey got it into his silly head that all he had to do to win his master's favor was to act like the dog. So one day he left his stable and clattered eagerly into the house. Finding his master seated at the dinner table, he kicked up his heels and, with a loud bray, pranced giddily around the table, upsetting it as he did so. Then he planted his forefeet on his master's knees and rolled out his tongue to lick the master's face, as he had seen the dog do. But his weight upset the chair, and donkey and man rolled over together in the pile of broken dishes from the table. The master was much alarmed at the strange behavior of the donkey, and calling for help soon attracted the attention of the servants. When they saw the danger the master was in from the clumsy beast, they set upon the donkey and drove him with kicks and blows back to the stable. There they left him to mourn the foolishness that had brought him nothing but a sound beating. The moral of the story is this: behavior that is regarded as agreeable in one is very rude and impertinent in another. Do not try to gain favor by acting in a way that is contrary to your own nature and character. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Donkey and the Load of Salt. A merchant, driving his donkey homeward from the seashore with a heavy load of salt, came to a river crossed by a shallow ford. They had crossed this river many times before without accident. But this time the donkey slipped and fell when halfway over. And when the merchant at last got him to his feet, much of the salt had melted away. Delighted to find how much lighter his burden had become, the donkey finished the journey very gaily. Next day the merchant went for another load of salt. On the way home the donkey, remembering what had happened at the ford, purposely let himself fall into the water, and again got rid of most of his burden. The angry merchant immediately turned about and drove the donkey back to the seashore, where he loaded him with 2 great baskets of sponges. At the ford, the donkey again tumbled over, but when he had scrambled to his feet, it was a very disconsolate donkey that dragged himself homeward under a load 10 times heavier than before. The moral of the story is this: the same measures will not suit all circumstances. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Donkey Carrying the Image. A sacred image was being carried to the temple. It was mounted on a donkey, adorned with garlands and gorgeous trappings, and a grand procession of priests and pages followed it through the streets. As the donkey walked along, the people bowed their heads reverently or fell on their knees, and the donkey thought the honor was being paid to himself. With his head full of this foolish idea, he became so puffed up with pride and vanity that he halted and started to bray loudly. But in the midst of his song his driver guessed what the donkey had got into his head, and began to beat him unmercifully with a stick. "Go along with you, you stupid donkey," he cried. "The honor is not meant for you but for the image you are carrying." The moral of the story is this: do not try to take the credit to yourself that is due to others. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Donkey, the Fox, and the Lion. And Donkey and a fox had become close comrades and were constantly in each other's company. While the donkey cropped a fresh bit of greens, the fox would devour a chicken from the neighboring farmyard, or a bit of cheese filched from the dairy. One day the pair unexpectedly met a lion. The donkey was very much frightened, but the fox calmed his fears. "I will talk to him," he said. So the fox walked boldly up to the lion. "Your Highness," he said in an undertone, so the donkey could not hear him, "I've got a fine scheme in my head. If you promise not to hurt me, I will lead that foolish creature yonder into a pit where he can't get out, and you can feast at your pleasure." The lion agreed, and the fox returned to the donkey. "I made him promise not to hurt us," said the fox, "but come, I know a good place to hide till he is gone." So the fox led the donkey into a deep pit, but when the lion saw that the donkey was his for the taking, he first of all struck down the traitor fox. The moral of the story is this: Traders may expect treachery,